On this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
Welcome to this episode of Life Science Success. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don, and I'm a digital marketer. And before we get started today, I have just a quick word from our sponsor.
This episode of Life Science Success is brought to you by D3 Digital Media Marketing. Dive into the digital world with confidence and creativity on your side. D3 Digital Media Marketing is your all-in-one solution for making a lasting impact online. From the vibrant, engaging world of social media marketing, podcasts and webinars, to the strategic depths of website development, SEO, pay-per-click, email, and content marketing, we tailor our approach to fit your unique brand story. Let's elevate your presence, connect with your audience, and drive success together. Your digital journey starts here. Visit D3 Digital.
So with that, I just wanted to introduce my guest today, Dr. Geoffrey Stevens. He's the CEO of AI Cella. He has over 20 years of experience in biotechnology, and I'm really excited about this interview and being able to dive a little bit deeper in terms of his background and experience. And so with that, welcome, Jeff.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm excited to reach out to folks and talk a little bit about what AI Cell is doing these days.
That's great. So would you mind just taking a little bit of time and telling people about your background and what is it that led you to life sciences?
Yeah, so, my background going way back to grad school days, so my PhD's in immunology. So I'm a card-carrying immunologist for a long time now, 20 plus years. After a stint at the NIH for about 5 years, where I was at the Laboratory of Immunology at the NIAID, I moved on to industry. Took my first industry role at a company called MedImmune, where I was there for about close to 10 years. At MedImmune, my responsibility was really, starting as a junior scientist and kind of moving through the ranks and, from coming up with the inception of new targets and new ideas for drugs that might be interesting for the company on the autoimmune side, and really kind of taking them through their paces and going from really idea inception all the way to IND filing for some of the products. And from there moved into the CAR T space. And that was really driven by, the opportunities that were there. CAR T was becoming very hot at the time. And fundamentally, I'm a T cell biologist. So that was right in my wheelhouse. If there's one thing I know how to do, and maybe the only thing I know how to do is grow T cells very, very well. So that was kind of a very natural fit to do process development in the CAR T space. And, from there, I had a stint with my own enterprise, which was more of a software approach, looking at flow cytometry data, making flow cytometry data more objective. Spent some time, again, at the CAR T companies, doing really developing targets or approaches for Hodgkin's and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And, that led me to where I am today, the CEO of AI Cella, where we're, again, still in the cell therapy space, but trying to leverage artificial intelligence to, make manufacturing more efficient, make it cheaper, and hopefully make these therapies more accessible to patients.
Yeah, I would think that that's a fundamental thing as well for things like CAR T cell therapies and even some of the other therapies that are coming that are more immune focused as well. It seems to me like it's a fundamental need in the space as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, I'm probably a little biased, but we immunologists, we tend to think everything sort of comes back to the immune system in some respects. And I'm hearing that from people more and more. I get approached by folks that say, yeah, it's all about inflammation. And we certainly believe that's the case. But I've been sort of more on the biologic side. And there you're trying to sort of release the brakes of the immune system with things like anti-PD-1, anti-PD-L1, which are approved products out there and been very effective and successful. And the cell therapy space, I think, is a really exciting one just based on the data that's out there. They've been seeing really remarkable results in patients just who were really at the end of the rope in a sense, in terms of having received all the standard of care options and nothing really having worked. And then they get this autologous CAR T therapy, and they're cured. And it's in many cases a single shot. And patients I talked to, they got that shot 10 years ago, and they're still doing great, and they don't even think about their cancer anymore, which is amazing in my opinion.
Yeah, it's nice. It would be nice to not continue to have that burden, in your life as well. So, in terms of your, past history, what led you to want to be inside of biotechnology company in the first place?
So in my early sort of college days, I was kind of on that pre-med track, and what I found that I love the science behind medicine. I love the scientific aspects, the basic science behind it, and I didn't really feel like I was as comfortable in a physician setting. I really felt like research R&D was more for me, and I felt like that was really how I could make the greatest impact on people would be through an R&D effort, through developing drugs, which is why ultimately I went down that path. So I want to patient care was sort of at the forefront of my thinking, but I thought this was maybe a more suitable way for me personally to really contribute and make a difference in patients' lives.
Yeah. And then, did your experience at the NIH shape your approach to research and drug development?
Yeah, absolutely. So the NIH was a fantastic, sort of starting point for a new scientist, a newly minted PhD like me. The science they do there is fantastic. They have all the world renowned, all the people I read about in journal articles in grad school were the people I ended up working with at the NIH. So it was really a great breeding ground for scientific ideas and innovation, and they're really oriented towards training. That was the other thing. Not every institution, even in academia you go to, sometimes postdocs are sort of treated, like just laborers essentially, rather than colleagues. And what I loved about the NIH is you were truly a colleague. You're truly part of the community, and you really had an opportunity to interact with all these very world renowned scientists, and they sit down and listen to you, which was flattering and fantastic when you're a junior scientist like I was.
Yeah, and I also find I feel like the life sciences community, like once you start to, especially like whenever you're specialized. So it seems to me like all of you immunologists kind of at some level can sort of do the 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon and find some sort of relationship right back to the immunologist that right? That is are inside of that space. And it's funny because I'm working with right now a leader that sits inside of a research institution, and he's the same way. He'll sit there and go, well, this person, so then this person and this person. It's like, no, I have a very sort of direct path normally, and it has to do with I attended some meeting and I met somebody, I handed them a business card, or maybe I met them on LinkedIn and we had a Zoom call or something. Yeah, for me it's very direct with these networks, though I do feel like they're very interconnected.
They're extremely interconnected. It is a very small world, and I see this constantly with people like you said. The Kevin Bacon analogy is a pretty good one. I mean, it is a very small community, and we all somehow know each other in one way, shape, or form, and even if not directly, we know of this professor, that researcher. So yeah, it's definitely very, very much the case.
Yeah. So, with your past experience, it seems like you've worked inside of both large and small companies. Have those experiences also helped to shape where you are? And then also, how do you sort of compare kind of the past experiences that you have and bring things that are of value to the company that you're working with now?
Yeah, so yeah, like you said, I've been involved in both sort of large pharma places like AstraZeneca, where that was part of my MedImmune world back in the day when MedImmune was acquired by AZ, and What's great when you work for a big organization like that are the resources you have, right? It's there's a lot of structure there. Which can be good and bad in a way, but you do have that structure. You have a lot of historical knowledge that's part of the organization, which can be extremely helpful. But just having the financial resources and just the institutional resources, the things like access to literature and databases and things that you don't necessarily have the financing for when you're at a very small company. I mean, the downside is sort of, you know, sometimes big companies can be, very difficult to change, right? So they're resistant to change. There's a lot of inertia there. So it's a big cruise ship, and to try to turn it a little bit takes an awful lot of activation energy. And what's great with startups, it's sort of the complete opposite scenario, right? You've got financially not all the resources, but you're very nimble. Everybody's very innovative. There's a ton of energy there, and so, but there's not a lot of structure, which again can be good and bad. But I think having done stints in both at different times, that you both take advantage of the opportunities you're presented with depending on where you are.
Right. No, I agree with that. I used to oftentimes liken, big companies changing direction to like an albatross trying to take off, right? I mean, it takes all those
Yes.
steps and momentum to try and get going one direction. If all of a sudden an albatross needed to change direction, you'd have to completely stop,
Yes.
go the other direction. And so similar sort of analogy to your cruise ship analogy. But I do agree. I mean, I find it interesting that the structure teaches you an awful lot about scalability, I feel like. And
It does.
the opposite side of it being that, there's things in terms of the speed to be able to do something, and whether or not, if your level of effort to try and have a million conversations to put something in place in a larger company, whether that's really worth it at the end of the day or not. I had somebody recently tell me that they had several conversations about, let's just take AI as an example. I'm going to use it as an analogy here. It's not the exact thing, but what gender is your AI was the question. Is it male or female, or is it, something in between? And I mean, they spent a fair amount of time on this, and I found it interesting. That was part of the overall culture that, the question came up, but at the same time, was it really of value? Probably not.
Right, right. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I've not thought about that actually. But presumably it's learning based, and it might, who knows what it's picked up. Is there a bias towards one viewpoint or another? That's actually an interesting question.
Yeah.
But I agree. Probably, for if you're in a pharma company, how much value does that add? I'm not so sure.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Can you share more about your role in the FDA approval of Fasenra for asthma?
Yeah, so that was a really great and exciting project back in at my MedImmune/AstraZeneca days. So Fasenra is a depleting antibody which recognizes and binds to the alpha chain of the IL-5 receptor. So a lot of data out there, and there was even some clinical data from another sort of competing antibody, which really suggests it's important in the sort of the generation of eosinophils, or it actually has roles in different parts of eosinophil sort of ontogeny. And so what I was tasked to do, that was actually one of my first projects at AstraZeneca, was to lead a team to really evaluate the benralizumab, the antibody that it was a in-licensed antibody from a company called Bioa at the time. And our job was to basically take it, run it through its paces, take it through all the assays, and really to continue, basically take the baton from the company that we in-licensed it from, and continue that whole development process to really bring it from what was an R&D candidate drug to something that we could take and file an IND on. And so basically, we took it through the paces and help with the writing of the IND, the research portion that was really important. And that was an exciting project, and it was one that I can look at those TV commercials and say, hey, I had a role in that, and that was, and we did something very important there in terms of the assay development and come up with release criteria and a lot of things that are really important for making a drug at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you think about all the individuals that one drug can impact as well, and just to have even a small piece. It sounds like you had a larger role in it, but at the same time, even just having a small piece and the impact that these drugs can have is absolutely amazing as well.
Yeah, I think I was just really fortunate. I know a lot of folks go through their whole career, and then they're not always able to see the fruition of the drug that they were developing. Either for a variety of reasons, it's the bar for approval is very high for a lot of these things, and all sorts of steps along the way that where drugs can fail, all the way from formulation to the commercial strategy to all sorts of things scientifically I wasn't thinking about. But I think that was the value. One of the values of working for a big pharma was that you do have that opportunity, and you learn a lot about the entire drug development process, which sticks with you, and it's a great background to have for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you mentioned your experience in terms of CAR T therapies. What made you want to focus there? What sort of guided your career that direction?
Yeah, so fundamentally, I'm a T cell biologist. That's really been my entire career, focused on the development of T cells or differentiation of T cells, or different aspects of T cell development. So when I started hearing about CAR T and all the success, I thought, well, like I mentioned, there's one thing I know how to do, and that's grow T cells. And so there was a real demand for people who could help with process development, helping with optimizing the manufacturing around CAR T and T cells in general, TIL, CAR T, all the different flavors. So I looked at it as a really exciting opportunity for me to really leverage that expertise I had generated over the years in the T cell field and take that and apply that to a kind of a different area or a different disease indication, which was oncology. Previously, I'd really focused on the autoimmune side with respect to T cells. And so, I'm sure as you've talked to people, oncology is just autoimmune disease, but just, the other side of the coin, essentially. You're just trying to do the opposite of what you're trying to do in a inflammation autoimmune situation. So it was a really natural progression and
Mm.
an exciting time for CAR T.
Yeah, I've said this on a few recent podcasts because we talked about like CAR T cell therapies and other things that are being worked on now, and I remember very distinctly whenever I was at GE, people were just sort of talking about the monumental impact that monoclonal antibodies were going to have, on patients, and it seemed to take forever. I mean, I remember it's like, okay, so, when does this happen? When does this happen? I feel like, CAR T therapies are, can have an impact, but at the same time, if there was a more cost effective way to get them out to the broader population, right,
Sure.
that would be, even better, which leads me back to AI Cella. So would you tell me a little bit more about the mission of your organization and how is it that, you could see it maybe revolutionizing the cell therapy development?
So yeah, so having worked in the space and even had hands-on in the lab with my teams in terms of developing the manufacturing process, CAR T are really complicated to make, and there it's sort of the ultimate personalized medicine, the autologous therapies, and that you're getting cells from each individual patient, and all those cells behave differently, and so it's as personalized really as you can get when it comes to a therapy. It's the patient's own cells. You take them out, you modify them in a way to help make them fight cancer better, hopefully put them back into the patient. It doesn't get more personalized than something like that. So I think that where AI cell is fitting into that equation is I know very well that one of the main issues around some of these cell therapies is just the manufacturability, the scaling. And so what we're trying to do is provide some hopefully shortcuts using AI. So use AI to basically take all the parameters that are involved in developing a CAR T cell, which are in the hundreds. You have all sorts of different parameters that you could optimize. But of course, no one has time to optimize all of those parameters. There's just, you've got investors, you've got real life pressures when you're at a startup, especially, that you've got to deliver, and usually they want you to deliver pretty quickly on whatever it is
Right.
you're doing. There's not a lot of time to do sort of basic research. So our thought at AI Cella is that we can use AI to kind of bridge the gap and actually create some shortcuts and identify, kind of pre-identify in some cases, what are really the parameters, what should people really be focused on. And what we're finding is that they're not the things that you necessarily would intuitively think are important. And so we talk to a lot of people in the field, and there's a certain element sometimes in science of like chefs cooking in a kitchen. They're making a soup, and you find that people there's a certain amount of, well, I think a little more sugar here and a little more salt here. Of course, we're talking about cells, so it's not sugar and salt, but if it's a soup, that kind of logic might work. It might not work, but it's certainly not scientifically the most objective way to go about things. Is your gut feeling about, I think if I make this change and that change, that's most likely to do something important. But oftentimes it's not really rooted in a strong rationale. So I think AI gets you there much faster.
Yeah, I mean, just having something continually watch the road for you, right? I mean, to use the sort of auto driving car analogy, maybe to come along with this as well. That you don't necessarily need something to 100% drive the car, but at the same time, having something out there watching might help you avoid, essentially, killing all the cells or not getting as much out of production as you'd probably expect, I would imagine.
Exactly, and that's speaking of automated driving cars, that's one of our key data scientists. Actually, that was his role before, was in automated driving, and he was working with Tesla to sort of improve their automated driving system. And so we're it's that's one of the things with AI is it's a lot of the work we do, it's pretty data agnostic. I mean, anything from automated cars to automated driving cars to all sorts of things you can think of. We could pretty much take the algorithms that we use for cell therapy and apply them in the same way, and come up with some interesting data around manufacturing rather than automated self-driving cars. But it's that's one of the beauties, I think, of some of the work we do. Is we're focused on cell therapy now, but there's a lot we can do in the sphere of biology that is not just cell therapy, and that's one of the things that we're trying to expand into at this point.
So important to touch on as well. Can you explain the concept of critical process parameters, and what are they in cell therapy, and how can AI help identify them?
Sure. So CPPs, or critical process parameters, are basically the key variables that, or attributes or variables that seem to have a direct impact on either the quality of the therapy or the safety or the efficacy of the therapeutic that you're making. So understanding your CPPs is a really important component of the process development itself. So you want to try to understand what are the crucial parameters in order to maintain or to ensure that you have a consistent product at the end of the day, and one that behaves and performs the way you hope it will in the patient. And so I think it with the field of cell therapy, there's still a lot of questions around what are the critical process parameters. And so there are a number of ones that have been identified, but what we're finding is that really, in many respects, a lot of the key, or a lot of the critical process parameters, remain to be determined. And we're finding from our own work that a lot of the things that people really focus on are probably not the critical process parameters. And so I think that's what's the beauty of AI, is it really gives you insights that you would never be able to wrap your head around otherwise. That again, you can make a lot of assumptions about things, and a lot of people think they know just intuitively what's important. But I feel like the way to really approach that is using something like AI or machine learning to sort of have an unbiased view. Take in all those variables and see what the math tells you.
Yeah. Also important. What are some of the biggest challenges that you've run into trying to apply AI to cell therapy, and how is AI Cella addressing those?
Yeah, so a number of big challenges. I think what's kind of at the top of my mind at the moment. So we work with a lot of patient data that we get from our collaborators, and so it's been really a journey to actually be able to work with patient data, just because of privacy concerns and some of the issues around HIPAA and things that are really important from the patient perspective, obviously. And so uh, things like consent, informed consent, what have patients consented to, and what have they not? And so it's been an interesting journey to work with some of these institutions, because there's a lot of misconceptions about what AI can and can't do, and so people are obviously worried about, can you identify the patient? Can you
Hmm.
can you somehow get to the patient's identity through AI somehow? So all the work that we do is with de-identified, redacted, patient information. But there's still a lot of concern that AI is such a powerful tool, you might somehow be able to figure out who they are inadvertently, which is not really the case. But it's a misconception that's out there. I think sometimes people sort of overestimate what AI can and can't do, and so that's one of the things that we've been, having a lot of discussion with our partners. Is there's a lot of ethics around AI and patient information that people haven't really thought through entirely yet, and so that's one big issue. And another is just educating the community that we work with, the scientific community, who, believe it or not, are not as well versed in AI as you might expect they would be. And so there's a lot of educating and training on our part that goes into what we do, because people are not, people who do the bench work for process development are not data science experts, and not surprisingly. So on our end, we find a lot of education is required to kind of bring people up to speed, and at least bringing them up to a point where they know enough that they feel comfortable using the AI and what we're giving them and delivering them. And we do our best to make it as explainable and digestible as possible.
So I guess tell me, what does a typical client look like for AI Sala, and where are you at today in terms of development of your capability and its use out in the real world?
Yeah, so we've in terms of the capability and using it, so we've filed a couple of patents now. I think we're pretty solid in that respect. So we're able to go out there and work very vigorously with people. But yeah, so I think in terms of the companies we're looking for, typically the traction that we've had, and this is just anecdotally what we find, is that tend to be companies who are not quite as far along in the process. So, we've talked to pharma companies and folks like that who are a little bit, they maybe have marketed products, and for them, typically the feedback we get is, well, we kind of know what we know, and we don't really need any more help, and we're not going to change anything anyway.
Mm.
like, like they're kind of like, that train left the station a couple of years ago, and it sounds great, but for them, it's probably a little too late. So we really focus on the earlier stage companies, folks that maybe have phase one data, phase two data, so they're not entirely, the train hasn't quite left the station yet. There's some room there for improvement if they want to do it. But even some earlier startups that don't have clinical data, I think we have a lot to offer those folks.
Yeah, yeah, and I feel like the promise of these tools, in a lot of ways, sort of, um, could cut down a lot of the waste that we have, as well. And I feel like the 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 benefit of them definitely, needs to be applied, in earlier phases. But at the same time, it would be interesting to see, I guess, on a later stage drug, do you come up with any different answers than what
Yeah.
you originally had as well? So.
Yeah, I mean, what we're really keen on is kind of making that connection between the response in the patient and the way the cells were manufactured. So,
Sure.
when it comes to cell therapy, we have this kind of mantra in the field. We talk about the process is the product. And that's really entirely the case. I mean, the way you generate your cells, the way you grow them, the cytokines you use, the way you expand them, the type of vectors you use to introduce your CAR constructs. All of those things have an impact on how the cells behave in the patient. But we don't have a really good understanding exactly of what the relative importance of those different things are and what the ultimate impact is in terms of the patient. So scientifically, it's really interesting for us to try to understand that, how what did manufacturing look like for the cells that did really, really well versus the ones that didn't. I mean, there is a certain manufacturing failure rate. In my experience, about 30% of manufacturing runs fail for patients, and you have to remanufacture. And it's not always clear why that happens. So I think trying to understand some of these really fundamental things about how you manufacture the cells, um, we think will really translate ultimately in how they behave in the patient, and hopefully will improve, get rid of that 35% or 30% failure rate and hope improve that for patients.
Yeah, very good. So when you look out 5 or 10 years into the future, how do you see the field of personalized medicine, or more particularly cell therapies, evolving?
So I think there's a ton of therapies on the horizon right now. I think last count I had something like 667 ongoing clinical trials for CAR T therapy. So it's just a huge area right now. So I think where things, I think they're, the approved therapies right now are really focused on multiple myeloma, and they're really looking at, one or two B cell related targets. And I think what's happening now is everyone's broadening and they're looking at different antigens, different targets on the cells, looking at solid tumors. I think is the main focus of everyone right now. So I don't think anybody's sort of trying to reinvent the multiple myeloma approaches with CD19 CARs. I think right now everyone, which I think is great. I think if we can get some traction with solid tumors, which they're finally, I think, starting to see a little bit. I think there was a TIL therapy that was approved from a company called Iovance not long ago. So not exactly a CAR, but it was a T cell therapy directed at a solid tumor, and that was sort of the first proof of concept that clinically you could use a cell-based therapy like a TIL or a CAR in principle to go after a solid tumor. So I think solid tumors are the big thing, and the other big thing in the space are the allogeneic therapies. So, looking at more off-the-shelf approaches just to help with, improving the development time, improving the costs. Having something that you can just dig out of the freezer and put into a patient, it certainly would be faster and potentially cheaper. But it still remains to be seen, how well that approach is going to work versus the autologous therapies. Because with a, unrelated donor type of therapy, you have, rejection of the therapy itself, which could be an issue. You have graft versus host disease, which could be an issue. People have gotten really clever about genetic approaches and ways to sort of circumvent some of those issues. But and some of the genetic engineering people are doing right now is really quite for me, it's almost like science fiction, what you can do right now with CRISPR and some of the other technologies. But I'm surprised by some of the great results people are starting to see. So I think that, the challenge is we got to get out of the liquid tumor space and really, if we really want CAR T to be successful, and we all think it will be in solid tumors, we need to demonstrate that. And we probably need some better strategies. But there's a lot on the horizon. So I'm really excited about that.
Oh, all good, parts of a vision for the future, as well. Do you collaborate with academic institutions?
Yeah, so a lot of what we do is collaboration with academia. So we have some longstanding or sort of interactions with academics and PIs that I had relationships with, prior to this company. So it was a good opportunity for me to reach out to them, and what for us is really key is the data.
Hmm.
Getting our hands on the data to build the models, and so. Um, the AI, it's only as good as the data. So you can try to come up with a fancy new algorithm or a model, but that's not really what's important in my opinion. I think what you need is good high quality data. It's the old garbage in, garbage out mantra. I'm sure you've heard a million times by now, but it's absolutely the case. If you don't have a good quality data set, I'm sure you probably use Chat GPT. You know how AI can hallucinate and give you answers that are just out of thin air, and you don't necessarily know that when you get that output from Chat GPT, for example. But you have to really be careful, and you have to. I think that's where, from my perspective, having the data science background as well as the biology foundation really is helpful, because I can generally really make sense of what the outputs are, and if they are something that's logical and sensible. Whereas if I were a pure informatics guy, that would be a much tougher thing for me to try to discern.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen just some really brilliant bio bioinformatics guys as well. I mean, I feel like, sometimes, you look at the data and it's like, look, there's all this noise, or there's all this stuff that, sort of clouds our ability to see or do what we want to do. And lo and behold, they'll sort of say, well, look, if I do this way, essentially you're not going to see that anymore, because we will eliminate it in one way or another. To your point, though, I mean, that elimination, you kind of question, was there something important in there that maybe I didn't really understand, and now all of a sudden we've eliminated it on the other side. So, I know teams that I work with, oftentimes now, especially, I sort of test this idea of, hey, could we get just another opinion on this? I mean, as well, right? So that we don't get too far down the line thinking that we're all right, and then all of a sudden find out that we were way wrong, and then have to recalculate or redo a bunch of things. I've been inside of an organization before that would do that sort of whiplash. Internally, we had brilliant people kind of on both sides, and I felt like there was just a great ability to do it internally. But whenever you're talking about a really small organization, it can be a challenge as well.
For sure. I mean, that's coming back to your earlier question about the big versus large, or the big versus small biotech organizations. That's another point. I mean, when you're small, you can be limited in terms of your expertise, and you're right. I mean, it is good to reach out to people and get some external sort of verification or validation that, hey, this is having a good scientific advisory board is extremely helpful in that case, and having their input and feedback, just to get some external, somebody who's not got much skin in the game, come in and say, hey, this is good, or you guys are on the right track, or not, or there's something astray. And a lot of times those folks too have a lot of inside information from some of their collaborators and things like that they might be able to sort of provide you with some insight as well. But yeah, you don't want to be fooled. And like you said, the biggest waste of time is that whiplash, right? Is having to pivot and make a change based on some assumptions you made early on. And that's very costly. And again, with AI, we're hoping to kind of get around some of those issues, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you were to look at AI Sala today, what are some of the most exciting, projects or initiatives that you currently have going on in the organization?
So what we're really excited about at the moment is we've doing something that I really hadn't thought much about, when we started the company, which is we're getting a lot of traction with some of the equipment manufacturers, that companies that make equipment for doing cell therapy, and so in the field right now, automation is what is really hot. People are talking about trying to automate all these manufacturing process, which makes a infinite amount of sense. Just having less sort of hands involved in terms of the manufacturing, I think has lots and lots of advantages, just in terms of error reduction and efficiency, and also reducing costs. And so, it's not our goal to come in and replace people that do it, but I think rather than have people pipetting, very smart PhD level people who, pipette all day, I feel like using AI can sort of help get them back to using their brain, rather than, doing all the manual work involved in manufacturing cells. But it's still a lot of companies rely on that manual labor that goes into it. But I think many of us in the field are quite keen on getting beyond that. So what we're trying to do with the manufacturers, with the equipment manufacturers, is actually have our algorithms and models embedded as part of their machinery. And so, scientists, process development scientists will, hopefully the dream is come up and just press a button that says, hey, CAR T cell, and it will, in an automated fashion, take a model or a process that we've generated, which we know is optimized for those cells, and just apply that and use feedback to change the process as it goes along in order to keep it within the range of parameters we think are really important for developing the cells.
Also important. What's the greatest leadership advice that you've ever received?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I was thinking about this yesterday actually, and I don't know if it's any advice per se. It's more kind of observation, and I think what I've noted in terms of leaders that I always really tended to align with very very well were people that were just really authentic, and people who were really themselves, and people who stuck to their values and their principles. And I think it's just that authenticity that I tended to sort of gravitate to. And I try to be that leader for my people. So just be authentic and genuine. And transparency, I think, is really important. And that's not a given in a lot of organizations that people are transparent with the folks on the team. But I think it just makes an incredible difference to keeping people motivated, to keeping them engaged, and obviously you can't always inform about every single aspect of what's going on with the company, but I do think that the authenticity, the honesty, and transparency really go a long way to being a good leader.
Yeah, I agree with you. So I mean, to your earlier point in terms of the authenticity, I've worked with plenty of people that I feel like take on the shape of a chameleon. They can, shapeshift, and that their personality gets lost in that, right? So who are you, and what do you stand for, and what are kind of your core values, become less important whenever you do that. But I also think, back to our big company, small company, analogy here, I think there are a lot more shapeshifters inside of larger companies because
Yes.
oftentimes the politics sort of drives you one way or the other. And like it or not, most bigger organizations have some level of it. And so you have to sort of, take the blows of, let's just say individuals that, are criticizing things, but you may not feel like they're right. And then at the same time, you're having to try and figure out, like, how do you just get the job done? Just go do the work and get the job done, which is not that easy, with showing your personality and your true self as well. So good that you extracted that along the way.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, there's been plenty of situations where, because we work in the scientific profession, right? So the biology and the things you do in the lab, they are what they are, right? I mean, the data is the data, and you can kind of criticize the experimental setup, or you can criticize, the interpretation, but at the end of the day, when you have a pretty clear cut result, that may not be a result that was expected or anticipated, or one that is beneficial to the product. I mean, you got to get it out there, and as a scientist, I feel like that's my job, to deliver the good news and the bad news. Right?
Right.
You have to
Yeah.
be honest and open, and but it's certainly been many occasions where that did not fly very well at companies. Where you have a late stage project, and I come in and I couldn't reproduce some of the data, and then it's my fault.
Right. Yeah. Is it a reproducibility problem, or is it something else? Absolutely.
Is it my hands in the lab, and so,
Yeah.
but honestly, it's always been my experience that you do the experiment right and you repeat it enough, and if that's the data you get, that's probably the data.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
for better or worse.
What inspires you?
Patients inspire me a lot. So the past, I would say, 8 or 9 months, I've had a lot of opportunity to interact with patients at different meetings I've been to. People have received these cell therapies, and just their a lot of these folks were people who were in the early clinical trials. They basically signed on for an experimental therapy, something like a CAR T, where you didn't know what the outcome was going to be, and really the bravery and the courage they had to get into something which conceivably might have shortened their life, even, or
Mm.
really had some significant adverse effects. And I think it's those people that really inspire me, that really take on the challenge of taking these experimental therapies and not knowing what the outcome is going to be ahead of time. And fortunately, with CAR T, it's panned out really well. But certainly been cases where that wasn't the case. So, and I think other scientists inspire me. Honestly, interacting with other scientists, hearing their ideas. There's so much innovation out there, so much creativity, and it's. I love going to meetings and hearing about all the new ideas, all the innovation that's out there, and just these ideas that like I was talking about, some of the genetic modifications that people are attempting right now. For me, was kind of science fiction a few years ago, and right now it's what people are doing, day in and day out. So I'm just excited on the whole about the whole space, and I think for me the mission is to make these therapies more accessible to patients, make them more affordable, and I think everybody's on the same page in that respect. I think these therapies still tend to be very costly and very much kind of a boutique type therapy, and I think eventually, I think we are with CAR T right now where biologics was like maybe 30, 35 years ago, where it was a very expensive, very novel therapy that people didn't really understand. They didn't know what to do with. The physicians were not always clear on, some of the aspects, the dosing and things like that. And so I think all of that is now also true of CAR T. And I think hopefully 20 years from now, we're sitting here and CAR Ts are sort of an afterthought, or cell therapies in general are an afterthought, and we'll have sort of figured out all the bumps in the road, and hopefully with what we're doing at AI Cella, we're part of that.
Excellent. What concerns you?
I think in terms of what concerns me, oh boy, I would say, well, some of the concerns I mentioned are around the patient privacy, and not that that's in and of itself concerning, but just our access to some of the data. I think I do worry that everybody kind of has their own little data silos, and there's obvious reasons for that. People want to keep certain information confidential, obviously, if you're at a private place, and people want to publish. But I do think what I would love to see, and what I may, what I'm putting together a grant for right now is some kind of a consortium or a way that people could share data, because a lot of the folks that we talk to, they've got boatloads of data that's in a lab notebook somewhere that just sits in the lab and they never look at it. And this is all incredibly interesting, useful data, but who has time to go back? And everybody intends to do it. I was in the same boat, but I think sort of the way that we handle the data, and I think an element of data sharing that's sort of above and beyond what we currently do would be a great step ahead for the whole field.
All very true and very, very important. I mean, I do understand both sides of the coin here, but at the same time, if only we could share a lot more information, and we might get to some of the answers we want a lot faster, right?
I think so. I think everybody would benefit from it ultimately, and so, again, I like you said, there are two sides to that coin, and the sharing and the intellectual property and some of the legal issues surrounding all that stuff. But I think in my perfect world, I would see a little bit more openness and more ability to share some insights, and I think that would help make the field grow much faster.
Thank you for sharing that. What excites you?
Oh, I'm excited about automation, and as I was kind of talking about before, some of the equipment manufacturers, and some of the folks who are really trying to revolutionize the way we manufacture these therapies. And I really think that'll go a long way towards making them more accessible and affordable if we can, sort of get rid of I don't want to say get rid of the human element. I mean, the human element's always going to be there. They'll be running the equipment, but maybe at least the manual component of that, I think, really is something that it's just not necessary right now. And I think there's some really great, ways that we could circumvent that and make the whole process much faster and cheaper.
Oh, thank you again for sharing that one. And so Geoffrey Stevens, thanks a lot for being on the Life Science Success Podcast. I really appreciate you being here and for telling us about AI Cella and all the collaborative work that you have that's going on. Wish you well on your grant, and certainly wish you well in the future as well.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it, and last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.